The morning shift at Rosie's diner had been brutal. Sarah Mitchell wiped down the sticky countertop for what felt like the 100th time that day, her lower back aching with each movement. The small roadside diner in rural Pennsylvania wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Well, barely paid the bills if she was being honest with herself. At 28 years old, Sarah had imagined her life would look different by now. She'd dreamed of finishing college, maybe becoming a teacher like her mother had been, but life had other plans. When her mom got sick during Sarah's sophomore year, she dropped out to take care of her. The medical bills piled up faster than snow in a Pennsylvania winter. Even after her mother passed 2 years ago, Sarah was still drowning in debt, working double shifts just to keep her head above water. The lunch rush had finally died down, leaving only a handful of customers scattered throughout the diner. Sarah glanced at the clock. 3 more hours until her shift ended. Then she had to rush across town to her second job cleaning offices. She allowed herself a brief moment to close her eyes and roll her shoulders, trying to ease the tension. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new customer. Sarah opened her eyes and put on her best smile, the one she'd perfected over 6 years of waitressing. A man walked in, and something about him immediately stood out. He wore an expensive-looking suit that seemed out of place in their humble diner, but his face looked exhausted, almost haunted. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He chose a booth in the corner, away from the windows, and slumped into the seat like a man carrying the weight of the world. Sarah grabbed a menu and a glass of water, making her way over to him. "Welcome to Rosie's," she said warmly. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man looked up at her with tired blue eyes. For a moment he seemed startled, as if he'd forgotten where he was. "Yes, please. Coffee would be good. Black." Sarah poured the coffee and set it down gently in front of him. Up close she could see the deep lines of stress etched around his eyes and mouth. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "Take your time with the menu," she said kindly. "No rush." He nodded absently, staring at the menu without really seeing it. Sarah returned to her other tables, but she kept glancing back at the man in the corner. There was something deeply sad about him, something that tugged at her heart. She'd seen plenty of troubled souls come through the diner over the years. Truck drivers running from failed marriages, salespeople drowning their sorrows after losing big accounts, drifters with nowhere else to go. But this man seemed different. His sadness felt heavier somehow, more profound. 20 minutes passed and he still hadn't ordered. Sarah approached again, concern growing in her chest. "Sir, have you decided what you'd like?" He looked up and she saw his eyes were red-rimmed. Had he been crying? "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not very hungry. Just the coffee is fine." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her this man needed more than just coffee. "You know what?" she said, making a decision. "Let me bring you some of our soup. It's homemade chicken noodle. My specialty, actually. On the house. You don't have to—" "I insist," Sarah said firmly but gently. "You look like you could use something warm." Before he could protest further, she hurried to the kitchen. She ladled out a generous bowl of soup, added some fresh bread rolls and brought it back to his table along with a refill of his coffee. The man stared at the food, then up at her. "Why are you being so kind to me?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah shrugged, offering a genuine smile. "Because you look like you're having a really hard day, and sometimes a bowl of soup can help. Plus, kindness doesn't cost anything." She left him to eat, busying herself with other tasks. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched as he slowly began to eat the soup. With each spoonful, he seemed to relax slightly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. An hour later, he was still there, nursing his third cup of coffee. The diner was nearly empty now, just 2 regulars at the counter reading newspapers. Sarah approached to see if he needed anything else. "That was the best soup I've had in years," he said, and for the first time she saw a small smile on his face. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Sarah replied. "Feeling a bit better?" He nodded slowly. "A bit. You know, I came here today planning to— well, let's just say I wasn't in a good place. For your kindness, that simple act of bringing me soup, it reminded me that there's still goodness in the world." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at what he wasn't saying. She sat down across from him, something she normally wouldn't do during a shift. But her boss Rosie had gone home early, leaving her in charge. "Whatever you're going through," Sarah said softly, "it will pass. I know that sounds like a cliché, but I've learned it's true. 3 years ago, I lost my mom to cancer. The debt nearly destroyed me. Some days I didn't want to get out of bed, but I did, and slowly things got a little easier. Not perfect, not even good some days, but easier. The man studied her face carefully, as if really seeing her for the first time. You're carrying your own burdens, yet you still took the time to care about a stranger. We're all carrying something, Sarah said simply. That's why we need to be kind to each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Finally, the man reached for his wallet. He pulled out some bills and left them on the table, then stood to leave. Thank you, Sarah, he said, reading her name tag. You've given me something precious today. Hope. As he walked out the door, Sarah moved to clear his table. She picked up the bills he'd left and froze. Along with a $20 bill for his coffee, he'd left a $100 bill as a tip. Underneath was a business card. Her hands trembled as she read the card. Richard Westbrook, CEO, Westbrook Industries. Sarah's heart raced. Westbrook Industries was one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. She'd seen their name on the news, their products in stores everywhere. And she'd just served their CEO soup and shared her life story with him. But more than that, she'd connected with another human being who was hurting. The money was generous, incredibly so. But what struck her most was the word he'd written on the back of his business card in shaky handwriting. Thank you for saving my life today. Sarah sank into the nearest booth. The card and money clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her face. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness would set in motion a series of events that would change everything she thought she knew about her life, about success and about the unexpected ways the universe rewards those who give from the heart. Sarah stared at the business card for 3 days straight. She kept it in her apron pocket at work, pulled it out during her breaks, and placed it on her nightstand before bed. The $100 tip had been a godsend. She'd been able to pay her electric bill before it got shut off and still have enough left over for groceries that weren't just ramen noodles and peanut butter. But it was the message on the back that haunted her. Thank you for saving my life today. What had Richard Westbrook meant by that? Had he really been in such a dark place that a bowl of soup and a kind word had pulled him back from the edge? She thought about calling the number on the card 100 times, but always talked herself out of it. What would she even say? Men like Richard Westbrook lived in a completely different world than she did. He'd probably forgotten about her already, moved on with his billionaire life. On the 4th day, Sarah was wiping down tables during the slow afternoon shift when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was another debt collector, but something made her pick up. Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell? The voice was professional, female, crisp. Yes, this is she. Please hold for Mr. Westbrook. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. Before she could process what was happening, that familiar, tired voice came on the line. Sarah, this is Richard Westbrook. I hope I'm not disturbing you at work. No, it's fine. We're slow right now, Sarah managed to say, her voice shaking slightly. How did you get my number? I asked the owner of the diner. I hope that's not too intrusive. I wanted to reach out personally to thank you again for last week. That day was the worst day of my life, and you showed me compassion when I desperately needed it. Sarah moved to the back room for privacy. I'm glad I could help. Are you doing better? There was a pause on the line. I am, actually. Thanks to you. Look, I know this might sound strange, but I'd like to meet with you again. Have a proper conversation. Would you be willing to have coffee with me tomorrow? I can come to the diner if that's easier. Sarah's mind raced. Was this real? Sure. I have tomorrow off, actually. But you don't have to come all the way out here. How about the Starbucks on Main Street in town? Say 2 o'clock? They agreed on the details and hung up. Sarah stood in the back room, phone clutched in her hand, wondering what she'd just agreed to. That night she barely slept, trying on different outfits, worrying about what to say, what to expect. The next afternoon, Sarah arrived at the Starbucks 15 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. When Richard Westbrook walked in, he looked different than he had at the diner. Still tired, but more composed. He wore jeans and a simple sweater, clearly trying to look less intimidating than in his business suit. He spotted her immediately and smiled. Sarah, thank you for coming. They ordered coffee and found a quiet table in the corner. For a moment, neither spoke, both nursing their drinks and avoiding eye contact. Finally, Richard broke the silence. I want to tell you what happened that day. Why I was in your diner, why I was in such a state. Sarah nodded, listening intently. That morning I'd lost my wife, Richard began, his voice heavy. Not lost as in she passed away, but lost as in she left me. Served me with divorce papers after 32 years of marriage. She said I'd become a stranger to her, that I cared more about my company than our family. And the terrible truth is she was right. He took a shaky breath. But that wasn't even the worst of it. That same morning I'd received test results. The chest pains I'd been ignoring. Advanced heart disease. The doctor told me I needed immediate surgery, that I'd been pushing myself so hard I'd nearly worked myself to death. Literally. Sarah's hand instinctively reached across the table, covering his. I'm so sorry. I left the doctor's office and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. I ended up on that highway and I saw your diner. At that moment, I was seriously considering driving my car off the road. Ending it all. The thought of dying alone, having wasted my life chasing money and success, having pushed away everyone who mattered. It felt unbearable. Tears rolled down his cheeks and he didn't bother wiping them away. Then I walked into your diner. And you, this young woman who was clearly struggling herself, you showed me kindness. You gave me soup you couldn't afford to give away. You sat with me. You shared your own pain to help ease mine. In that moment, I realized that what I'd been missing my whole life wasn't more success or more money. It was connection, humanity, kindness. Sarah felt tears pricking her own eyes. What did you do after you left? I checked myself into the hospital, had the surgery I needed, started therapy, called my kids who I'd barely spoken to in years, began the long process of trying to become a better person. He looked directly at her. You gave me a second chance at life, Sarah, and I want to give something back to you. You already gave me that generous tip, Sarah protested. You don't owe me anything. Richard shook his head. It's not about owing. It's about wanting to help someone who helped me. I've done some research, Sarah. I know about your mother's medical debt. I know you're working 2 jobs just to survive. I know you dropped out of college to take care of her. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. How do you know all that? I'm a businessman. I know how to find information, Richard said gently. But I'm not here to judge. I'm here to offer you an opportunity. I want to pay off your mother's medical debt. All of it. Sarah's mouth fell open. What? No, I can't accept that. That's over $80,000. I know exactly how much it is, and to me that's a drop in the bucket. But to you, it's your freedom. Let me do this. Sarah's head was spinning. Why would you do this for me? Because you did something for me without expecting anything in return. Because I've spent my whole life accumulating wealth, and I'm just now learning that the best use of money is helping people. Because you deserve a chance to live your life instead of just surviving it. They talked for 3 more hours. Richard shared more about his life, his regrets, his hopes for change. Sarah talked about her dreams, the teaching career she'd abandoned, her love of literature and working with kids. As the coffee shop began to close, they exchanged phone numbers. Think about my offer, Richard said as they prepared to leave. You don't have to decide right now, but please let me help you. Over the next week, Sarah wrestled with the decision. Part of her was screaming to accept, to finally be free of the crushing debt. But another part worried about accepting charity, about what strings might be attached, about pride and independence. Finally, she called Richard. Okay, she said simply. I accept. But on one condition. What's that? Someday, when I'm in a position to help someone else the way you're helping me, I will. This kindness doesn't stop with me. It gets passed forward. Richard's voice was warm with emotion. Deal. That's exactly the right attitude. Within 2 weeks, Sarah's medical debt was paid in full. The letters stopped coming. The phone calls from collection agencies ceased. For the first time in 3 years, she could breathe without that crushing weight on her chest. But Richard wasn't done. He called her again a month later with another proposal that would test whether Sarah was ready for an even bigger change in her life. Sarah was sorting through her mail when Richard's call came. For the first time in years, the stack contained no red-marked bills, no threatening letters from collection agencies. Just a few normal pieces of mail and a college catalog she'd requested on a whim. The debt freedom felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. Sarah, I have a proposition for you, Richard said after their initial pleasantries. And before you say no, I want you to hear me out completely. Sarah settled into her worn couch, curiosity piqued. I'm listening. I've been working on something new. After my health scare and divorce, I've been reassessing my priorities. Westbrook Industries is successful, but it's not fulfilling. I'm starting a new division, a foundation actually, focused on education and community development. I want to help people the way you helped me. And I want you to be part of it. Part of it how? Sarah asked cautiously. I want to hire you, full-time, to help me build this foundation from the ground up. You'd work directly with me, help identify people in communities who need support, develop programs, oversee implementations. It's not charity work. It's a real job with a real salary. $60,000 a year to start, full benefits and opportunities for growth. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. $60,000 was more than she made in both her current jobs combined. Richard, I'm a waitress and a part-time office cleaner. I don't have the qualifications for something like this. You have exactly the qualifications I need. You understand what it's like to struggle. You have compassion and integrity. You're smart and hardworking. The business stuff, the technical skills, those can be taught. But your character? That's something you either have or you don't. And you have it. Sarah's mind reeled with possibilities and doubts. I need time to think about this. Take all the time you need. But Sarah? Don't let fear or self-doubt make this decision for you. You deserve this opportunity. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her mother, about how proud she would have been. Her mom had always believed in her, always told her she was destined for something more than just getting by. But was she really qualified for this? What if she failed? What if she disappointed Richard? She called her best friend Maria at midnight. Am I crazy to even consider this? Sarah asked after explaining everything. Maria, who'd been her rock through all the hardest times, responded without hesitation. You're crazy if you don't take it. Sarah, you've been handed a golden ticket. Some people wait their whole lives for an opportunity like this. But what if I'm not good enough? Stop it, Maria said firmly. You're one of the smartest people I know. You managed to keep your mom comfortable on nothing, kept 2 jobs running, and still found time to volunteer at the children's library on weekends. If that doesn't show you can handle responsibility, I don't know what does. 2 days later, Sarah called Richard back. I accept. But I want to do this right. I want to go back to school, finish my degree while I work. If I'm going to help run a foundation, I need to know what I'm doing. Richard's laugh was warm and genuine. That's exactly the kind of initiative I was hoping for. Tell you what, the foundation will pay for your education as part of your employment package. Deal? Deal. Sarah gave notice at both her jobs. Her boss at the diner, Rosie, hugged her tight with tears in her eyes. I always knew you were meant for bigger things, sweetheart. You go show them what you're made of. Starting at the Westbrook Foundation was overwhelming at first. The office was in downtown Philadelphia. A sleek, modern space that felt alien compared to the diner's worn vinyl booths. Sarah had her own office, a real office with a door and a window overlooking the city. She had business cards printed with her name and the title, Program Development Director. Richard was patient, teaching her the ropes of the business world, introducing her to nonprofit management, grant writing, and strategic planning. But he also listened to her ideas, valued her perspective, and made it clear that her voice mattered. Their first major project was creating scholarship programs for students who'd had to leave college due to family emergencies, just like Sarah had. She threw herself into the work, researching best practices, reaching out to universities, developing application processes. Within 3 months, they'd awarded scholarships to 15 students. One evening, working late in the office, Richard brought Sarah a cup of coffee. You've been here until 8 o'clock every night this week. You know you don't have to work that hard, right? Sarah looked up from her laptop, smiling. I know, but this doesn't feel like work. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters. Every scholarship we award, every family we help, it feels like I'm honoring my mom's memory. Richard sat down across from her. Your mother would be incredibly proud of you. I hope you know that. I think about her every day, Sarah admitted. She used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they give away. I never really understood what she meant until now. As the months passed, Sarah flourished in her new role. She enrolled in online classes to finish her degree, this time studying nonprofit management and social work. She discovered she had a natural talent for connecting with people, for understanding community needs, for developing programs that actually made a difference. The foundation grew rapidly. What started as scholarship programs expanded into job training initiatives, small business grants for struggling entrepreneurs, and community centers in underserved neighborhoods. Sarah found herself traveling to different cities, meeting with community leaders, speaking at conferences about their work. But success brought new challenges. Some of Richard's business associates were skeptical of Sarah, questioning her credentials, suggesting Richard had made a mistake hiring someone without experience. At a board meeting 6 months in, one particularly hostile board member challenged her directly. "Ms. Mitchell, with all due respect, what makes you qualified to oversee a multi-million-dollar foundation? You were serving coffee a year ago." Sarah felt her face flush, but she met his gaze steadily. "You're right. A year ago I was a waitress. I was also buried in medical debt, working 80 hours a week and choosing between paying my electric bill or buying groceries. I know what it's like to apply for assistance programs and be denied because you make $50 too much. I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn." She stood up, her voice growing stronger. "My qualification isn't an MBA from Harvard. It's lived experience. It's understanding the people we're trying to help, because I was one of them. Every program we develop, I ask myself, would this have helped me? Would this have helped my mother? If the answer is no, we don't do it. That's my qualification." The room fell silent. Then Richard began to clap, followed by several other board members. The skeptical member sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. After the meeting, Richard pulled Sarah aside. "That was brilliant. You held your ground and spoke your truth. That's leadership." Sarah's confidence grew with each success. She hired a team of talented, passionate people who shared her vision. They opened their first community center in a struggling neighborhood in Philadelphia, offering free job training, childcare, and educational programs. At the center's grand opening, hundreds of people from the community showed up. Sarah stood at the podium looking out at the crowd and felt overwhelmed with emotion. A year ago, she'd been serving soup to a stranger in a roadside diner. Now she was helping create opportunities for entire communities. But just as everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, Sarah would face a test that would challenge everything she'd built and force her to make an impossible choice between loyalty and integrity. The crisis began on a rainy Tuesday morning. Sarah arrived at the foundation office to find Richard in his office with the door closed, something he rarely did. Through the glass, she could see him on the phone, his posture tense, his face grave. When he finally emerged 2 hours later, he looked 20 years older. "We need to talk," he said quietly, gesturing her into his office. Sarah sat down, concern knotting in her stomach. "What's wrong?" Richard sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. "There's a problem at Westbrook Industries. A big one. Our main manufacturing plant has been dumping chemical waste into the local water supply. It's been going on for years, apparently. The EPA found out. We're facing massive fines, potential criminal charges, and lawsuits from the community." Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "How did this happen?" "Cost-cutting measures implemented by the plant manager without my knowledge. He falsified reports, bribed inspectors. I was so focused on the foundation, so checked out from the day-to-day operations of the company that I missed it completely." Richard's voice was thick with shame. "People are sick, Sarah. Children have elevated lead levels in their blood, and it's my company's fault. What are you going to do? The lawyers are advising me to settle quietly, pay the fines, move on. But that doesn't feel right. These are real people whose lives we've damaged. I need to make this right, truly right. But here's the problem." Richard looked at her directly. Making it truly right could bankrupt the company. And if Westbrook Industries goes under, the foundation's funding goes with it. Sarah's blood ran cold. The foundation supported dozens of programs now, helped thousands of people. Her team of 15 employees would lose their jobs. The scholarship students would lose their funding. The community centers would close. How bad could it get? She asked. Worst case? We lose everything. The company, the foundation, all of it. I'd be left with almost nothing. Richard's voice broke. "I'm asking you, Sarah, what should I do? You're the moral compass of this operation. I trust your judgment." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there were families drinking contaminated water, children getting sick, communities suffering because of corporate negligence. But also out there were the scholarship recipients, the job training graduates, the families whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. She turned back to Richard. "Tell me about the community that was affected by the dumping." Richard pulled up files on his computer. Riverside. Small town about 2 hours west of here. Population around 8,000. The plant is their main employer. 500 jobs. So if the company goes under, not only do they have contaminated water, but half the town loses their income. Richard nodded grimly. It's a nightmare scenario all around. Sarah sat back down, her mind racing. Here's what I think. You can't hide from this or buy your way out quietly. You need to face it head on, take full responsibility, and commit to making it genuinely right, whatever the cost. That's the only moral choice. Even if it means losing the foundation? Sarah's throat tightened, but she nodded. Even then, the foundation means everything to me, but it can't be built on a company that's poisoning people. That would corrupt everything we're trying to do. Richard was quiet for a long moment. You realize you're potentially arguing yourself out of a job? I know, but this is bigger than me, bigger than the foundation. Those people in Riverside deserve justice, not hush money. Richard stood and extended his hand. Thank you for your honesty. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard took action. He held a press conference, taking full responsibility for the contamination. He announced that Westbrook Industries would pay for comprehensive health screening for every resident of Riverside, fund water filtration systems for every home and business, and establish a medical monitoring program for the next 20 years. He fired the executives responsible and cooperated fully with law enforcement. The media attention was intense and brutal. Richard was vilified on the news, his face plastered across newspapers with headlines about corporate greed and negligence. The company's stock price plummeted. Investors fled. Major clients canceled contracts. Sarah watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. The foundation had to freeze new initiatives. They couldn't take on new scholarship students. 2 staff members left for more stable jobs. The future looked increasingly uncertain. 3 weeks after the announcement, Richard called Sarah into his office again. She'd been preparing herself for this conversation, had already updated her resume, started looking at other job opportunities. She loved her work at the foundation, but she'd known the risks when she'd advised Richard to come clean. I wanted to update you on where things stand, Richard began. His face was drawn, exhausted, but there was something different in his eyes. Peace, maybe? The fines are substantial. The remediation costs are massive. We've lost about 60% of our business. The company will survive, but barely. We'll have to sell off assets, downsize significantly. Sarah nodded, waiting for the inevitable news that the foundation would be shutting down. But here's what I didn't expect. Richard continued, his voice strengthening. Something remarkable happened. After the press conference, after I took responsibility, people started reaching out. Other business leaders who respected the accountability, foundations that wanted to partner with us, individuals who believed in what we were doing. He pulled out a folder. In the past 3 weeks, we've received unsolicited donations totaling $4 million for the foundation. People from all over the country, saying they believe in our mission, that they want to support work being done with integrity. Sarah's eyes widened. 4 million? And 3 major philanthropic foundations have reached out about long-term partnerships. They want to help fund our programs independently of Westbrook Industries. Sarah, the foundation isn't dying. It's becoming independent, sustainable in its own right. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I can't believe it. There's more, Richard said, his own eyes moist. The community of Riverside, they're not suing. After we announced the comprehensive remediation plan and the medical monitoring, the mayor called me. He said they appreciated that we were trying to make things truly right instead of just paying fines and moving on. They want to work with us on economic development, help transition their economy so they're not dependent on one employer. They asked if the foundation could help. Sarah laughed through her tears. Of course we'll help. That's exactly what we do. I've learned something through all of this, Richard said thoughtfully. When I first met you, you showed me kindness when I needed it most. You didn't know who I was or what I could do for you. You just helped because it was the right thing to do. And when I asked your advice about Riverside, you told me the truth even though it might have cost you everything. That's integrity. That's the kind of character that actually changes the world. You took the harder path, Sarah pointed out. You could have handled this quietly, protected your wealth, kept everything comfortable. But you chose to do the right thing even though it hurt. We both did, and somehow things are working out. Not the way I expected, but maybe better. The foundation restructured over the following months, establishing its own board of directors, diversifying its funding sources, expanding its mission. Sarah was promoted to executive director, leading the organization into its new phase. Her team grew to 30 people, all passionate about the work, all committed to the foundation's values. 1 year after the Riverside crisis, Sarah stood in the town square for the dedication of Riverside's new community center and job training facility, funded by the foundation. The water was clean now, every home had filtration systems, and a new economic development plan was bringing diverse businesses to the area. The mayor approached her after the ceremony. "Ms. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally. We know it was your advice that pushed Mr. Westbrook to handle things the right way. This could have gone very differently." Sarah shook her head. "Richard made his own choice. I just told him what I believed. Well, your belief helped save our town, and gave us something more valuable than clean water. It gave us hope that some companies actually care about people more than profits." As Sarah drove back to Philadelphia that evening, she reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From a struggling waitress drowning in debt, to the leader of a thriving foundation making real change in people's lives, all because she'd shown kindness to a stranger on his darkest day. But the biggest test was still to come, one that would require Sarah to risk everything she'd built for a chance to help one more person who desperately needed it. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, forwarded from the old diner where Sarah used to work. The envelope was worn and dirty, the handwriting shaky and uncertain. Sarah almost tossed it aside with the other mail, but something made her open it. Inside was a single page written in pencil on lined paper torn from a notebook. The words were barely legible, clearly written by someone who struggled with literacy. "Dear Sarah, you don't know me, but I heard about you from my cousin who got one of your scholarships. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm in prison. I've been here for 8 years and I have 7 more to go. I made bad choices when I was young and now I'm paying for them. But I want to be different when I get out. I want to be someone my daughter can be proud of. She's 10 now. By the time I'm free, she'll be 17. I don't want her to end up like me. I heard your foundation helps people who are trying to change their lives. Can you help someone like me? I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Marcus Thompson, Inmate State Correctional Facility." Sarah read the letter 3 times. Her heart ached for this man, this father desperately trying to build something better from behind bars. But she also knew that prison programs were controversial. The Foundation's board had specifically avoided anything related to criminal justice, worried about public perception. She brought the letter to her senior staff meeting the next day. The reaction was mixed. "It's too risky," said Tom, the finance director. "Our donors won't support programs for prisoners. It could damage our reputation and cost us funding." Jennifer, who ran their educational programs, disagreed. "Our mission is to help people transform their lives. Why should people who've made mistakes be excluded from that?" "Because they're criminals," Tom shot back. "There's a difference between helping struggling families and helping convicted felons." Sarah listened to both sides, saying little. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Marcus's daughter, about how she'd grow up with her father behind bars. She thought about second chances, about how Richard had been given one when she'd shown him kindness, how she'd been given one when he'd paid off her debt and offered her this job. The next morning, Sarah drove 2 hours to the state correctional facility. She'd arranged a visit with Marcus through the prison administration, claiming it was for a research project on prisoner rehabilitation. Marcus Thompson was a large man, over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and calloused hands. But when he sat down across from her in the visiting room, she saw fear and hope warring in his eyes. "You came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't think you would." "Tell me your story," Sarah said gently. Marcus talked for an hour. He'd grown up in poverty, no father, mother addicted to drugs. He'd joined a gang at 13, sold drugs to survive, ended up shooting someone during a robbery gone wrong. The victim survived, but Marcus got 15 years. "For the first 5 years I was angry," Marcus admitted. "Blamed everyone but myself. But then I got a letter from my daughter. She was learning to write and wanted to show me. It was just a few sentences misspelled, but it broke my heart. She wrote, 'Daddy, when you come home, can you teach me to read better?' And I realized I can't even read properly myself. How am I going to teach her?" He'd started taking classes in prison, learning to read and write properly for the first time. He'd gotten his GED, taken vocational training in carpentry, He'd stayed out of trouble, joined a program for fathers trying to stay connected with their kids. "I'm not the same person who came in here," Marcus said. "But when I get out, who's going to give me a chance? Who hires ex-cons? I'll have a record forever. My daughter deserves better than having a father who can't find work and ends up back in here." Sarah felt tears threatening. "What do you want from the foundation?" "I want to learn more. I want to be able to get a job when I'm out. I want help connecting with my daughter, being a better father even from in here. And when I'm released, I want help starting over, finding work, getting on my feet." Marcus looked directly at her. "I know it's a lot to ask. I know I messed up bad. But if your foundation is about second chances, I'm asking for mine." Sarah drove home in silence, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. That weekend, she did something she hadn't done in months. She went back to Rosie's diner. Rosie hugged her tight. "Look at you, all professional in your fancy clothes. But you still look like my Sarah." They sat in Sarah's old booth, drinking coffee. Sarah told Rosie everything about the letter, about Marcus, about the dilemma she faced. Rosie listened quietly, then said, "You know what your mother used to tell me? She'd come in here sometimes after her shifts at the school and we'd talk. She said the kids who needed the most help were always the ones who'd made the biggest mistakes. The troublemakers, the ones others had given up on. She said those were the ones who could change the most if someone just believed in them." "But this is different," Sarah protested. "He's a convicted felon. My board will fight me on this. We could lose donors, so you could have lost everything when you told Richard to come clean about Riverside. But you did the right thing anyway and it worked out." Rosie covered Sarah's hand with her own. "Honey, what's the point of having power and resources if you're too scared to use them for the people who need it most?" Sarah made her decision. At the next board meeting, she presented a proposal for a new pilot program, the Second Chance Initiative. It would provide educational support, job training, family counseling, and re-entry services for incarcerated individuals preparing for release. The board erupted in arguments. Several members threatened to resign. Tom, the finance director, warned that they'd lose major donors. Only a few supported the idea immediately. Richard, who'd remained mostly quiet during the heated discussion, finally spoke. 3 years ago, I was at my lowest point. Most people would have seen a broken, privileged man and felt no sympathy. But Sarah saw a human being who needed help. She didn't judge my past decisions. She just showed me kindness. That kindness saved my life and led to all of this." He gestured around the room. "If we're not willing to extend that same humanity to people like Marcus Thompson, then what are we really doing here?" The room fell silent. Richard continued, "I vote yes on Sarah's proposal, and I'll personally guarantee funding for the first year if we lose donors over it. Sometimes doing the right thing costs something, but it's still the right thing." The vote was close, but the proposal passed. Sarah immediately began developing the program, partnering with the correctional facility, hiring staff with experience in criminal justice reform, designing curriculum. Marcus became their first participant. Over the following months, Sarah watched him flourish. He completed advanced carpentry training, started regular video calls with his daughter with the foundation's support, and began working on his anger management and life skills. But not everyone was happy about the new direction. 3 major donors withdrew their support, citing concerns about helping criminals. Several angry letters to the editor appeared in local papers, criticizing the foundation for coddling convicts. Sarah faced harsh criticism on social media, with people questioning her judgment and values. One particularly brutal article appeared in a major newspaper, titled "From Waitress to Director. Is Sarah Mitchell in over her head?" It questioned her qualifications, suggested she was too emotionally driven, implied that Richard Westbrook had made a mistake giving her so much responsibility. Sarah sat in her office, reading the article, feeling the weight of doubt pressing down on her. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a waitress playing at being a director. Maybe Marcus was a mistake, and she was risking everything they'd built for one man who might fail anyway. Her phone rang. It was Richard.
"Have you seen the article?"
"Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "And what do you think?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I think they might be right. I'm not qualified for this. I don't have the education, the experience. Maybe I've been fooling myself." "Stop right there," Richard said firmly. 3 years ago, you showed me that the most important qualification isn't what's on your resume. It's what's in your heart. You're facing criticism because you're doing something difficult and important. If this work was easy and popular, everyone would be doing it. But what if Marcus fails? What if this whole program fails? Then we learn from it and try again. Sarah, the old me, the one you met in that diner, he never failed because he never tried anything that mattered. He was successful and miserable. You've taught me that real success isn't avoiding failure. It's having the courage to try even when failure is possible. After they hung up, Sarah sat for a long time in her office. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out a box from her desk drawer, one she'd kept but rarely opened. Inside were her mother's things, including a small notebook her mother had used for her thoughts and prayers. Sarah flipped through the pages, reading her mother's familiar handwriting. Near the end, she found an entry from just a few weeks before her mother's death. "Today I'm worried about Sarah. She's given up so much to take care of me. I pray that someday she'll find her purpose, that she'll use this hard experience to help others. My smart, kind girl is meant for something special. I won't be here to see it, but I believe it with all my heart." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Her mother had believed in her even when Sarah didn't believe in herself. And Richard believed in her. And somewhere in a prison cell, Marcus Thompson believed in her. Maybe it was time she believed in herself too. Sarah wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and got back to work. The Second Chance initiative would succeed or fail, but she wouldn't give up on it. She wouldn't give up on Marcus. Because that's what real leaders did. They stood firm in their values even when it was hard. What Sarah didn't know was that her next challenge would test not just her values, but her very character in a way she never could have imagined. 6 months into the Second Chance initiative, Sarah received devastating news. Richard collapsed during a board meeting and was rushed to the hospital. His heart condition had worsened despite the surgery years ago. The doctors said he needed a transplant, but at his age and with his medical history, his chances of getting one in time were slim. Sarah spent every free moment at the hospital. Richard looked frail in the hospital bed, a shadow of the vital man who'd walked into her diner years ago. But his mind was still sharp, and he wanted to talk about the foundation. "I need you to promise me something," Richard said weakly one evening. "If I don't make it, don't let them shut down the Second Chance program. I know it's controversial, but it matters." "You're going to be fine," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "Maybe, maybe not. But promise me anyway." "I promise." 2 days later, Richard's son Daniel arrived from California. Sarah had never met him before. Daniel was in his early 40s, polished and professional, a corporate lawyer who'd followed in his father's footsteps until the divorce. Their first meeting was tense. Daniel pulled Sarah aside in the hospital corridor. "I need to know what your intentions are regarding my father." Sarah was taken aback. "My intentions? I care about him. He's my friend and mentor. He's also a very wealthy man who's been very generous with you. I've done my research, Ms. Mitchell. 3 years ago, you were a waitress. Now you're running a foundation with an 8-figure budget, and my father treats you like family. Some might find that suspicious." Sarah felt anger rising but kept her voice level. "Your father helped me when I needed it most. I've worked hard to earn my position and to honor his trust. I'm sure you have, but I'm also my father's power of attorney. If he becomes incapacitated, I make decisions about his assets, including the foundation's funding. I think it's important we understand each other." The message was clear. Daniel didn't trust her and had the power to shut everything down. Richard's condition stabilized temporarily, but he remained in the hospital. Daniel started attending foundation meetings, asking pointed questions about expenses, scrutinizing every program, especially the Second Chance initiative. At one particularly contentious meeting, Daniel challenged Sarah directly. "This prison program, it's hemorrhaging money and goodwill. We've lost 3 major donors. The return on investment is questionable at best." "We don't measure success by return on investment," Sarah replied calmly. "We measure it by lives changed." "Very noble. But this is still a business operation that requires funding. My father built his success on smart financial decisions. This program is neither smart nor financially sound." Jennifer, Sarah's colleague, spoke up. "Actually, our preliminary data shows that participants in the Second Chance program have a significantly lower recidivism rate than the general prison population. That's exactly the kind of impact we should be investing in." Daniel was unmoved. "I'm recommending that we phase out this program. Redirect those resources to less controversial initiatives. Sarah felt panic rising. Your father specifically asked me to continue this program. He believes in it. My father is on heart medication that affects his judgment. When he's recovered, we can revisit it. Until then, I'm making the practical decisions he can't make right now. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, feeling more helpless than she had in years. She thought about Marcus, who'd been doing so well, who'd reconnected with his daughter, who had hope for the first time. She thought about the 12 other men in the program who were working so hard to change their lives. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus's daughter, Aaliyah. The foundation had set up regular communication between Marcus and his daughter, and sometimes Aaliyah reached out to Sarah directly. Miss Sarah, my dad is so happy now. He tells me about the classes he's taking. He says when he gets out, we're going to build a bookshelf together. Thank you for believing in him. He says you're his angel. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't let this program die. But how could she fight Daniel, who had legal authority over Richard's affairs? The next morning, Sarah went to see Marcus in prison. She'd been visiting regularly, and their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. Marcus had become something of a leader among other inmates, encouraging them to take advantage of educational opportunities. I need to be honest with you, Sarah said after they'd settled in the visiting room. The program might be shut down. Richard's son is taking over and he doesn't see the value in it. Marcus's face fell, but he nodded slowly. I understand. It was too good to be true anyway. No, Sarah said firmly. Don't say that. You've worked too hard to give up now. I'm not going to let this happen without a fight. What can you do? You said he has the legal power. I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out. Marcus studied her face. You know what I learned in here? Sometimes you can't fight the big battles head on. Sometimes you have to find another way around. His words stuck with Sarah as she drove back to the city. Another way around. What did that mean in this situation? The answer came to her in the middle of the night. She couldn't fight Daniel legally, but she could make a public case. She could show people why the program mattered, let them see the real impact it was having. Sarah spent the next week coordinating something ambitious. She contacted local news stations, pitched the story of the Second Chance Initiative, offered unprecedented access to the program and its participants. One investigative journalist, a woman named Patricia Chen, was particularly interested. Patricia spent days at the prison interviewing Marcus and other participants. She talked to their families, reviewed the program's outcomes data, and interviewed Sarah extensively about the foundation's work. The resulting story aired on a Sunday evening, a 15-minute feature during the local news. It opened with Marcus talking about his transformation, showing him in carpentry class sharing video calls with his daughter. It featured Aaliyah talking about how proud she was of her father's changes. Then it showed Sarah's interview, where she spoke passionately about second chances, about redemption, about how society benefits when people are given opportunities to change. The segment ended with a powerful moment. Marcus reading a letter he'd written to his younger self, warning him about the path he'd chosen, expressing regret, but also hope. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished. The response was overwhelming. The news station's phone lines lit up with calls of support. Social media exploded with people sharing the story, praising the foundation's work. Several prominent community leaders publicly endorsed the program. Most surprisingly, former donors who'd withdrawn their support called to reinstate their contributions. New donors came forward, specifically wanting to fund the Second Chance Initiative. Within a week, the program had more financial backing than ever before. Daniel was furious. He confronted Sarah in her office. You went behind my back. You manipulated public opinion to undermine my authority. I showed people the truth about what we're doing, Sarah responded calmly. That's not manipulation. That's transparency. You know what I think? I think you're scared that when my father dies, you'll lose your meal ticket. This is all about protecting your position. Sarah stood up, her voice shaking with anger. How dare you? I love your father. Not for his money, but for who he is as a person. He taught me that success means nothing if you're not using it to help others. Something you apparently never learned. You don't know anything about me or my relationship with my father. I know he wishes you were here for him instead of just protecting your inheritance. I know he's heartbroken that his children abandoned him when he needed them most. And I know that he found more family in this foundation than he ever had with you. Daniel's face went red, Get out. You're fired. You can't fire me. The board of directors has hiring and firing authority, not you. We'll see about that. Daniel stormed out. Sarah collapsed into her chair, shaking. Had she gone too far? But she'd spoken the truth. Richard had told her many times how much it hurt that his children had distanced themselves from him after the divorce. That evening, Sarah visited Richard in the hospital. He was having a good day, sitting up and alert. She told him everything that had happened, including her confrontation with Daniel. Richard listened quietly, then sighed. Daniel is angry and he has every right to be. I wasn't there for him when he was growing up. I missed his baseball games, his graduation, his wedding. I chose work over family every time. When his mother left me, he took her side. I can't blame him for that. But he's trying to destroy everything you've built with the foundation. No, Richard said gently. He's trying to protect what he thinks is his father's legacy. He's just confused about what that legacy really is. Richard reached for Sarah's hand. I need to talk to him. Send him in, please. Sarah waited outside while Richard and Daniel talked for over an hour. She couldn't hear what was said, but when Daniel emerged, his eyes were red from crying. He looked at Sarah and something in his expression had softened. My father wants to see both of us together, Daniel said quietly. They entered Richard's room together. Richard looked exhausted but determined. I've just explained to Daniel what really happened 3 years ago when I walked into your diner, Sarah. I never told him the full story. He didn't know I'd been planning to end my life that day. He didn't know that your kindness saved me. Daniel looked down at his hands. Dad told me everything. About Mom leaving, the diagnosis, how close he came to giving up, and how you helped him without knowing who he was or what he could do for you. Richard continued. I also told him about Riverside, about how you advised me to take responsibility even though it could have cost you everything. About how you've built this foundation into something that genuinely helps people, not just looks good on paper. Richard's voice grew stronger. Daniel, Sarah isn't here for money or position. She's here because she genuinely cares about making a difference. She's become the daughter I wish I'd been a better father to you and your sister. Sarah saw tears streaming down Daniel's face. I'm sorry, he said to Sarah. I've been angry at my father for so long and I took it out on you. You didn't deserve that. I understand, Sarah said simply. Family is complicated. Richard interrupted. The doctors told me today that I probably won't get a transplant in time. I have maybe a few months, possibly less. He held up his hand as both Sarah and Daniel started to protest. It's okay. I'm at peace with it, but I need to know that the work will continue, that you two will work together to keep the foundation strong. Daniel looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and seemed to see her clearly for the first time. The work you're doing matters. I can see that now. I'd like to help if you'll let me. What none of them knew was that the greatest test was still ahead, one that would require all three of them to make an impossible sacrifice for the sake of something bigger than themselves. Richard's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next month. He was moved to hospice care, surrounded by family, finally reconciled with his children after years of estrangement. Sarah visited every day, sometimes just sitting quietly beside his bed holding his hand as he slept. During one of his lucid moments, Richard pulled Sarah close. I need to tell you something. About my will. Richard, don't worry about that now. Listen, he insisted weakly. I've left the bulk of my estate to my children, as it should be. But I've also established a permanent endowment for the foundation. $50 million. It will be managed by a board of trustees, with you as the foundation's director for as long as you want the position. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep doing what you do. Keep helping people. Keep showing the kind of kindness you showed me that day in the diner. That's all I ask. I promise. Richard smiled peacefully. Good, now tell me about Marcus. How's he doing? Sarah spent the next hour telling Richard about the Second Chance program's successes. Marcus was excelling in his studies and had been accepted into an advanced carpentry certification program. 2 other participants had found legitimate job placements waiting for them upon release. The program had expanded to 2 more correctional facilities. 3 days later, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his children and Sarah. The funeral was a major event, attended by business leaders, politicians, and community members whose lives had been touched by Richard's transformation. But the most moving moment came when Marcus's daughter, Aaliyah, was allowed to speak. She stood at the podium, small and nervous, and read a letter her father had written from prison. Mr. Westbrook never met me, but he changed my life, because he believed in Miss Sarah, and Miss Sarah believed in my dad, and my dad is becoming the father I always wanted. Mr. Westbrook gave people second chances. He gave my dad a second chance. He gave me a second chance to have a father. Thank you for showing us that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be forever. I'll never forget what you did for my family. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. After Richard's death, Sarah threw herself into expanding the foundation's reach. The endowment he'd left provided stability and freedom to take on more ambitious projects. Daniel, true to his word, joined the board of directors and proved to be a valuable asset, bringing business acumen and legal expertise to the organization. The Second Chance Initiative became a model program studied by criminal justice reformers across the country. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with other organizations to share the lessons she'd learned. But her proudest moment came 2 years after Richard's death, when Marcus Thompson was released from prison early for good behavior and exceptional progress. Sarah was there at the prison gates when he walked out, along with Aliyah, who was now 12 years old. Father and daughter embraced for the first time in 10 years without barriers between them, both crying. Marcus looked over Aliyah's shoulder at Sarah and mouthed the words, "Thank you." The foundation had arranged for Marcus to live in a halfway house and begin work with a construction company owned by someone who believed in second chances. His first project would be helping build the foundation's newest community center. 3 months after his release, Sarah visited Marcus at the construction site. He was teaching a group of young men carpentry skills, many of them kids from the neighborhood who'd been headed down the same path he'd once taken. "Look at you," Sarah said, watching him work. "From student to teacher." Marcus grinned. "I learned from the best. You showed me that helping others is how we heal ourselves." "Actually, I learned that from someone else, a man who walked into a diner on the worst day of his life and taught me that a small act of kindness can change everything." That evening, Sarah drove out to the old diner. Rosie had retired the previous year and new owners had taken over, but they'd kept the name and much of the charm. Sarah sat in her old booth, ordered coffee, and pulled out her journal. She'd started keeping a journal after her mother's death, but for years she'd barely written in it, too exhausted by life to reflect on it. Now she wrote regularly, processing her experiences, recording the lessons she was learning. Tonight she wrote about the journey that had begun in this very booth 5 years ago. How a simple bowl of soup and a kind word had saved a man's life. How that man had then saved hers by giving her a chance to dream again. How together they'd built something that was helping thousands of people transform their lives. She thought about the ripple effects of kindness. Richard had helped her, and she'd helped Marcus, and Marcus was now helping others. The waitress who'd served her coffee tonight had been helped by one of the foundation's job training programs. The teenager buzzing tables was a scholarship recipient, the first person in his family to attend college. One small act of kindness, repeated and multiplied, could change the world. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9. We have a major decision to make. Another foundation wants to merge with us. It would double our reach but change everything. Your thoughts?" Sarah smiled. There was always another challenge, another decision, another opportunity to make a difference. The work was never done, but that was okay. She'd learned to embrace the uncertainty, to trust in the process, to believe that as long as they stayed true to their values, things would work out. As she drove home through the Pennsylvania evening, Sarah thought about her mother, about how proud she would be. She thought about Richard, hoping wherever he was, he knew that his legacy lived on. She thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by the foundation, all the second chances given, all the hope restored, and she thought about that younger version of herself, exhausted and debt-ridden, serving soup to a stranger on a random Tuesday afternoon. If she could go back and tell that Sarah what was coming, would she believe it? Probably not. The future had unfolded in ways she never could have imagined. But that was the beautiful mystery of kindness. You never knew where it would lead. You just had to trust that it mattered, that small acts of compassion rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict or control. Sarah pulled into her apartment parking lot, which was in a much nicer neighborhood now, though she'd deliberately chosen something modest. She didn't need luxury. She needed enough. As she walked to her door, she noticed a young woman sitting on the steps of the building, crying quietly. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then sat down beside her. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently. The woman looked up, startled. I'm fine, just having a bad day. Want to talk about it? And just like that, another connection was made, another life touched by simple kindness. The woman, whose name was Jessica, was a nursing student drowning in debt after her father's sudden death. She was considering dropping out, giving up on her dreams. Sarah listened to her story, saw herself in this struggling young woman, and felt that familiar pull in her heart. The pull that had led her to help Richard, to advocate for Marcus, to build a foundation that changed lives. Tell me your story, Sarah said. All of it. And then let me tell you about a diner, a bowl of soup, and how the smallest act of kindness can change everything. They talked for 2 hours on those steps. By the end of the conversation, Jessica had Sarah's business card and an appointment to discuss scholarship opportunities. She also had something more valuable, hope. As Sarah finally entered her apartment that night, she thought about the circular nature of life, how the helped become helpers, how receiving kindness teaches us to give it. She'd started as a waitress serving soup. Now she was still serving, just in a different way, still offering nourishment to hungry souls, still providing comfort to those having the worst days of their lives. The foundation continued to grow and evolve. The Second Chance initiative expanded to 12 states. They launched new programs for homeless youth, for elderly people struggling with medical debt, for immigrant families seeking better lives. Each program was built on the same principle. Everyone deserves dignity, opportunity, and a second chance. 5 years after Richard's death, on the anniversary of that pivotal day in the diner, Sarah organized a special event. She brought together everyone whose life had been transformed by the foundation. Marcus was there with Aliyah, who was now thriving in high school and talking about becoming a social worker. Jessica, the nursing student Sarah had met on her steps, was there in her scrubs, having just finished her first year as an RN at a children's hospital. There were scholarship recipients who'd graduated college, entrepreneurs who'd built successful businesses with the foundation's support, families who'd escaped cycles of poverty, and former prisoners who'd successfully reintegrated into society. Sarah stood before this room full of people and felt overwhelming gratitude, not for her success, but for the privilege of witnessing so much transformation, so much courage, so much human resilience. 5 years ago, Sarah began, I was a waitress who served soup to a stranger. I didn't know that simple act would lead to all of this. But here's what I've learned. We never know the impact of our kindness. We never know whose life we might change with a word, a gesture, a moment of genuine care. She paused, looking around the room. Every person here has a story of transformation, and every one of those stories started with someone showing you kindness when you needed it most. Now I challenge you, go out and be that person for someone else. Show up for someone having their worst day. Offer hope to someone who's lost it. Give a chance to someone everyone else has given up on. Because that's how we change the world. Not with grand gestures or massive programs, though those matter too. We change the world one act of kindness at a time, one connection at a time, one person choosing to see the humanity in another person. The room erupted in applause. As Sarah looked out at all these beautiful faces, all these transformed lives, she felt her mother's presence, felt Richard's smile, felt the weight and wonder of this incredible journey. From a waitress's small act, to a billionaire's transformation, to a foundation changing thousands of lives. The ripples spread ever outward, and somewhere in a diner or on a street corner or in a hospital waiting room, another small act of kindness was happening, setting in motion another chain of transformation that would touch lives in ways no one could yet imagine. That was the power of compassion. That was the legacy of choosing kindness over indifference, hope over despair, connection over isolation. It didn't always make the news or win awards, but it changed everything. Sarah's story, like all the best stories, didn't really have an ending. It was still being written, still unfolding, still touching new lives, because kindness, once set in motion, never really stops. It just keeps going, rippling outward, changing the world one heart at a time. And it all started with just a tip, with a bowl of soup, with a waitress who decided that a stranger's pain mattered more than the rules, that compassion was more important than protocol, that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power. Years later, when people asked Sarah about the secret to her success, she always gave the same answer. There's no secret. Just show up. Care about people. Do the next right thing. And trust that kindness matters even when you can't see the results. It was advice her mother had given her. Advice Richard had lived out in his final years. Advice Marcus had learned and now passed on to others. Advice that, in the end, was the foundation of everything good they'd built together. Just a tip? No, it was so much more than that. It was a beginning. It was a spark that lit a fire of transformation that would burn brightly for generations to come. And it all started with a waitress who chose kindness on a random Tuesday afternoon, never knowing that she was about to change a billionaire's life, and in doing so, change her own life and the lives of countless others forever.